My younger sister, Xiaxing, and I were born into a moderately affluent family with assets of several million. Initially, the four-member family led a stable, smooth, and uneventful life. However, my father was extremely ambitious, constantly yearning to cross social strata and ascend to the unattainable upper-class society. To this end, he began to painstakingly cultivate my sister and me at an early age, with the full hope of marrying us both into top-tier wealthy families. My grandfather, who did not approve of my parents' educational philosophy, entered our home when I was X years old, citing the need to pass on his painting skills. Grandfather declared that he would take one of my sister and me as his heir. In the previous life, my sister, believing that following grandfather would enable her to inherit all of his family property, left with him without hesitation. Thereafter, she became a free-spirited painter, leading a life as she pleased and ultimately inheriting grandfather's fortune of over 100 million. But when my sister witnessed me marrying into a super-rich family ranked among the top 10 on the national Forbes list, jealousy immediately flared up in her eyes. Thus in this life, when grandfather appeared again, Xiaxing hurriedly took hold of both my father's and mother's hands, and said in a sweet voice, "Dad, Mom, I will definitely work hard to earn money and take good care of you in the future." My sister had always been naughty and difficult to discipline. When my parents heard these words, they beamed with joy. With a gentle smile on my face, I took the initiative to hold grandfather's hand, and said in a soft and sweet voice, "Grandpa, I also want to take care of you in your old age." Upon hearing this, grandfather smiled with satisfaction and said, "Then let's go." Before leaving, my sister came to see us off. Just as I was about to get into the car, she said with a look of pride and arrogance, "Xiaoyu, it's my turn to be a wealthy lady of a noble family in this life." Her eyes were filled with eager desire and barely concealed greed. I gently curved my lips and said meaningfully, "Then I wish you all your heart's desires." Xiaxing has always been vain. In the aristocratic school, whenever she saw female classmates wearing limited edition clothes and shoes, she would surely pester our parents to buy them for her. However, due to our parents' limited means, they often refused her requests, and for this reason, she had many tantrums with them. My grandfather, a renowned painter in the country, could sell any of his paintings for tens of millions of yuan. Xiaxing naively thought that after following grandfather, she could freely buy those limited edition clothes. But grandfather never indulged her. He sent her to an ordinary school, bought her ordinary clothes, and never took her to wealthy people's gatherings. Every day, he just urged her to paint. My sister once complained, "The sight of the canvas and paint makes me want to vomit." And she was full of envy for me. My parents went to great lengths to marry me into a wealthy family. They signed me up for various talent training courses. Under their careful cultivation, I became proficient in playing the zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. When I was X years old, my parents held a grand coming-of-age ceremony for me. I shone brightly at the coming-of-age ceremony and immediately won the hearts of many rich second-generation heirs. I became the most sought-after socialite in the circle. After graduating from university, my parents introduced me to Zhang Tingfei, a top-tier domestic tycoon, X years older than me. From then on, I transformed into a wealthy lady envied by everyone. Wherever I went, I could enjoy VIP-level treatment. Xiaxing was extremely jealous of this. In order to live the life I had, she resorted to unscrupulous means, even climbing into her brother-in-law's bed and getting pregnant with his child. However, Zhang Tingfei was just playing around and had no intention of marrying her. He also asked her to abort the child. Xiaxing flew into a rage. To take revenge on Zhang Tingfei, she set his entire villa on fire in a fit of anger, and the entire Zhang family perished in the fire. On the verge of death, Xiaxing imprisoned me in a room, choking my neck and trying to die with me. She said viciously, "If I can't have it, neither can you." When we opened our eyes again, we were both reborn. Before grandfather came to our home, Xiaxing said to me, "Xiaoyu, it's time to swap our life scripts. I want to be a wealthy lady of a noble family in this life." With a calm expression I replied, "Sure, that would be great. I firmly believe that in this life, she will have the opportunity to see Zhang Tingfei's true nature, which is worse than that of a beast. I only hope that by then, she can still smile and say to me, 'Xiaoyu, I don't regret my choice in this life.'" After returning to grandfather's home, I felt completely relaxed. Although grandfather never bought me brand-name clothes, never took me to high-class parties, was rather strict with me, often forcing me to paint until he was satisfied, and never said any comforting words, I felt extremely at ease. No one forced me to attend various skill training courses anymore. No one compelled me to please the wealthy ladies in the circle anymore. And no one forced me to serve those greasy bosses, who could be my father, or even my grandfather. The life that Xiaxing dreamed of was actually what I most wanted to get rid of. Time flew by, and in a blink of an eye, I was X years old. During the Chinese New Year of this year, My mother brought Xiaxing to grandfather's home to pick up grandfather, and me to go home for the new year. I was dressed simply with a bare face, looking fresh and clean. In contrast, Xiaxing was dressed in minpai, with a light makeup, exuding refinement from head to toe. She looked at me with disdain and said, "Country bumpkin." As if I hadn't heard, I just smiled and remained silent. During the winter vacation, Xiaxing celebrated her XTH birthday. As the hope of the family carefully cultivated by our parents, her birthday was naturally a grand occasion. Xiaxing wore an expensive dress and applied a little makeup. She was like a delicate porcelain doll, so beautiful that people couldn't take their eyes off her. I still wore plain clothes and didn't wear any makeup, just wishing to be unnoticed. At the banquet, Xiaxing danced gracefully. Her dance was so stunning that it immediately won warm applause from the crowd. Xiaxing is so beautiful. Xiaxing was born to dance. It's a pity if she doesn't dance. Xiaxing, you're amazing. Amid the praises of the crowd, Xiaxing beamed with joy, and our parents were also extremely proud. I looked at grandfather beside me. Grandfather had an expressionless face. I asked softly, "Grandpa, Xiaxing danced so well. Why don't you clap for her?" Grandfather snorted and said disdainfully, "A vain family. What's there to clap for?" I just smiled and said nothing. Grandfather was truly sharp-eyed and saw through their family at a glance. After Xiaxing finished dancing, my parents asked her to ingratiate herself with those extremely wealthy socialites in the circle. However, Xiaxing's purpose was too obvious even though she tried her best to please them. No one was willing to show her any favor. Those few extremely wealthy socialites didn't stay long. They found the birthday party rather dull, and left one after another. Before leaving, I heard one of the wealthy socialites say to the others in a disdainful tone, "Xiaxing's parents want to package her and push her into our top-tier wealthy families who can't see that." I smiled again and remained silent. Oh, my parents, they were too clever for their own good. Those who were willing to stay and accompany Xiaxing throughout her birthday were all moderately affluent families with assets similar to those of the Xia family. But my parents simply looked down on them and told Xiaxing to act haughty and not get too close to them. When the birthday party ended, it was already X o'clock in the evening. Xiaxing failed to please the wealthy ladies of the top-tier families, which made my parents very dissatisfied. In front of my grandfather and me, they severely rebuked Xiaxing. My father said in a tone of disappointment, "I told you to say some nice things to them. Why didn't you say more? What's the use of your mouth, you fool?" Xiaxing felt deeply wronged and said, "Dad, Mom, I said everything you told me to say. They don't like me. What can I do?" My mother was extremely disappointed and said, "How dare you quibble? You'll be locked in the dark room tonight and not allowed to come out." As she spoke, she asked the servant to drag Xiaxing away. Grandfather said nothing. He just shook his head and sighed, then took my hand and went upstairs to rest. In the middle of the night, I got up to use the toilet. After using the toilet, I decided to go and check on Xiaxing. Xiaxing was locked in the dark room on the top floor. This dark room had neither water nor electricity. It was a special room that my parents specifically used to punish us. In my previous life, I had spent countless days and nights in this dark room. Whenever I disappointed my parents, such as failing to please those extremely wealthy socialites, failing to make their sons like me, or failing to capture the heart of a big shot, they would mercilessly lock me up here. As a result, I developed a deep fear of the dark. Xiaxing didn't know that in my previous life, I had been living in fear of the dark, and had suffered from insomnia on countless late nights. I visited all the somewhat famous doctors across the country, but I still couldn't be cured. When Xiaxing tried to die with me, I was already on the verge of collapse and my life was coming to an end at that time. I was not even X years old. Before reaching the top floor, I heard Xiaxing's crying voice coming down from above. That feeling of grievance and sadness permeated the late night, making it seem especially heavy. I involuntarily curved my lips and thought, "Xiaxing, is this the life you've been yearning for but couldn't get?" Time passed quickly, and soon my college entrance examination arrived. In my previous life, my academic performance was already good this time. I studied everything again, so I easily performed exceptionally well in the college entrance examination. I achieved an excellent score of X, and was successfully admitted to Harvard University. I was also the only high school graduate in the country to be admitted to Harvard University. Television stations came to report one after another, and I instantly became the most popular online celebrity. Netizens across the country cheered for me. Grandfather was extremely happy for meth and eloquent. Him even said to me excitedly, "Yeah, you're amazing. You're really amazing." When my parents learned that I had scored so highly, they were greatly shocked. Since I left with my grandfather, they had paid no attention to me at all, and had devoted all their attention to Xiaxing. In addition, I deliberately kept a low profile, and never shared my academic achievements or other good things with them. So it was difficult for them to notice me. They never expected that their eldest daughter, who they thought was unremarkable, had actually been admitted to Harvard University, a world-class institution. They had always been vain no matter what. They insisted on holding a celebration banquet for me without asking for our opinions. They picked up my grandfather and me, and took us to their home. Then they informed everyone in the circle, and invited wealthy people from moderately affluent and extremely wealthy families to come. Since I had been living with my grandfather, and had deliberately kept a low profile, few people in the circle knew about my existence. Now that I had shone brightly in the college entrance examination, it fully piqued their curiosity. Everyone rushed to my parents' home to attend my celebration banquet. The house was bustling with people. People are naturally drawn to the strong, those top-tier wealthy ladies whom Xia Xing had tried so hard to please, but who didn't even bother to give her a second glance, actually showed great favor towards me. Xiaoyu, how can you be so amazing? Xiaoyu, I'm planning to ask my son to repeat his senior year. Can you tutor him? Xiaoyu, do you have a boyfriend? I think you and my son are a perfect match. Would you like to consider my son? Seeing this situation, my father took advantage of the moment and quickly went back to his room to bring down the painting I had just finished. He said, "Our Yaya not only has excellent academic performance, but also has great talent in painting." My mother also chimed in with pride. Yes, my father has been teaching Yaya to paint. Yaya is diligent and eager to learn, and she has mastered all his essence. After everyone saw my painting, they all showed expressions of amazement. Yaya, your painting skills are so great. Xiaoyu, how can you be so all-round? You're just like a fairy descending to the mortal world. Xiaoyu, you're so excellent. If my daughter were half as excellent as you, I'd be over the moon. Everyone praised me to the skies, while Xia Xing was so jealous that her eyes turned red. After the celebration banquet ended, Xia Xing walked straight into my room. Her face was filled with resentment and unwillingness. She questioned me. Why? Why do you still steal the limelight from me in this life? Where exactly did I go wrong? Her eyes seemed as if they could devour me alive. I replied calmly, without the slightest ripple in my expression. I have never had the intention to compete with you. This is the reason those who are always eager to win and be the best often end up losing in the end, while those who have no intention of chasing after benefits can easily succeed. However, with Xia Xing's shallowness and ignorance, how could she understand these principles? Sure enough, she looked disdainful and sneered. Who would believe your nonsense? I said indifferently, believe it or not, it's up to you. She was still not reconciled and left a harsh word. In this life, I will never lose to you again. Let's wait and see. After that, I politely declined all the offers extended by the wealthy ladies. Despite my parents' strong opposition, I left for the United States with my grandfather early. On the one hand, I wanted to get used to the life there in advance, and on the other hand, I wanted to avoid my parents' endless pestering. After arriving in the United States, everything returned to peace, and I quickly adapted to the local rhythm of life. Time passed quickly, and a year passed in the blink of an eye. A year later, Xia Xing took the college entrance examination. She had once vowed to her parents that she would be admitted to Harvard University just like me, but in the end, she only scored X points and couldn't even meet the admission requirements of Tsinghua University and Peking University. My parents were greatly disappointed. I heard from the servants at home that she was locked in the dark room by her parents for 3 whole days and nights, and almost starved to death. I didn't even have the slightest interest in mocking it. Time flew by swiftly, and in the blink of an eye, I graduated from university. Thanks to my solid foundation in fine arts, even before graduation, numerous design companies extended invitations to me. What's more, 2 luxury goods companies offered me high-paying positions to join them. However, I have no interest in fame and fortune at all, nor do I want to be involved in that complex arena of fame and gain. I only long for freedom. After graduation, I went straight back to my home country, with the sole intention of accompanying and taking good care of my grandfather in the days to come. As soon as I returned to the country, my grandfather actively worked for my career in his art exhibitions. My works were always displayed simultaneously. Whenever he met someone, he would proudly introduce, "This is my granddaughter's work. She has surpassed me in talent." He also often mentioned my high educational background. She's a top student from Harvard University. Soon, I gained a certain reputation within the circle. At the same time, Xia Xing was also about to graduate from university in her senior year. Through the matchmaking of our parents, she had an encounter with Zhang Tingfei. After that, she took the initiative and courted Zhang Tingfei. Before long, she managed to win his heart. Our parents even bought her ovulation medicine right in front of me. They repeatedly admonished Xia Xing, "Make sure you get pregnant with his child. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Don't miss it." Xia Xing, beaming with joy, took the medicine and said, "Dad, Mom, don't worry at all this time. I definitely won't let you down." After our parents left, Xia Xing said to me triumphantly, "So what if you graduated from Harvard, Xiaoyu? In the end, you didn't marry as well as I did." She looked as if she had already become a wealthy lady of a noble family. I just smiled indifferently and said, "Then I wish you all your heart's desires." She thought that the life of a wealthy lady was full of beauty, but she didn't know that, in fact, few wealthy ladies could live a happy life as far as I know. There are many wealthy ladies who lead a miserable life. Xiaxing, since you're so eager to taste the hardships of being in a wealthy family, go ahead and experience them. Before graduating, Xiaxing successfully got pregnant with Zhang Tingfei's child. She gained status by virtue of her child. Originally, Zhang Tingfei had no intention of marrying Xiaxing. However, our parents posted the photos of their relationship on the internet, and even directly exposed the news of Xiaxing's pregnancy. They also bought trending topics to hype it up. As the chairman of a large company and a well-known philanthropist in the country, Zhang Tingfei's reputation was of utmost importance to him. In order to safeguard his reputation, he finally compromised and agreed to marry Xiaxing. The wedding was grand and magnificent. Xiaxing stole the show and couldn't stop smiling. But Zhang Tingfei's expression was indescribable. Once, when I passed by an empty corner, I unexpectedly saw Zhang Tingfei passionately kissing his secretary. The sight was so revolting that I almost threw up on the spot. After the kiss ended, the female secretary nestled in Zhang Tingfei's arms and coquettishly said, "Mr. Zhang, I'll be waiting for you at home tomorrow night. You must come." Zhang Tingfei gently stroked her hair and replied, "Okay, wait for me." The female secretary was so excited that she gave him a hard kiss on the face. Zhang Tingfei smiled wickedly and gave her a hard pat on the buttocks. The female secretary pouted and said, "You're so naughty. I almost vomited up my last night's meal." I quickly lifted my skirt and tiptoed away. In my previous life, Zhang Tingfei had an affair with his female secretary, which was almost an open secret in the company. The people in the company both looked down on the female secretary and were afraid of her. The female secretary once showed off in front of me defiantly, "You're just a concubine that Tingfei keeps, a tool for him to consolidate his business territory. I'm his true love. How can you compare with me?" Xiaxing knew nothing about these things, and I never told her. After all, I didn't want others to know how embarrassed I, Xiaoyu, had been. At that time, my body was already on the verge of collapse. When I was years old on the one hand, I was tortured by long-term insomnia and enormous mental pressure on the other hand. I kept giving myself psychological hints, thinking that my body was breaking down and my life was coming to an end. It's not that I didn't consider divorcing Zhang Tingfei, but those unbearable past experiences were like deep brands on my body that could never be erased. It would be better to end my life. Xiaxing didn't know that I didn't hold the slightest grudge against her for trying to burn me to death. Not long after getting married, Xiaxing, with her still unobvious baby bump, came to my grandfather's house to see me. This time, she was adorned with jewelry and radiated happiness. She proudly showed off the bracelet on her hand to me. "Do you know how much this is worth? 100 million yuan. Tingfei bid it for me, and these earrings are worth 5 million yuan. I showed no sign of envy and said indifferently, "Congratulations, Mrs. Zhang." Her smile gradually faded, and then she began to ridicule me without restraint. "So what if you graduated from Harvard, Xiaoyu? You're still not living as well as I am. Look at you now. You so rustic. You just like a country bumpkin." The disdain in her eyes was undisguised. "Xiaxing, she's your elder sister, and also the apple of my eye. Watch your mouth and show some respect." Grandfather suddenly appeared, his face cold, and severely rebuked Xiaxing. Xiaxing immediately looked aggrieved, but her eyes were filled with unwillingness and resentment. She gave me a fierce glare, then put her hand on her belly, and left my grandfather's house. Grandfather looked at her fleeing back and shook his head, sighing, "A person like her can't enjoy good fortune." I nodded slightly and said, "Xiaxing is ignorant and mean-spirited. She can't keep what she has now at all." I smiled at my grandfather and said, "Thank you, Grandpa." As I spoke, I opened my arms and hugged him. Grandfather hugged me tenderly and said, "As long as I'm alive, I won't let her bully you." At that moment, my tears almost welled up. The feeling of being cherished is really wonderful. After that, Xiaxing often showed off her life in the wealthy family to us. For example, she said she attended some high-class gatherings, had dinner with Bill Gates, the world's richest man, and also claimed that her house was always crowded with people every day, and everyone was vying to please her. Our parents felt proud when they heard this in front of me. They praised her profusely, and didn't forget to lecture me. "Xiaoyu, what's the use of you always messing around with your paintings? You'd better learn from your sister." I was too lazy to respond, and devoted myself wholeheartedly to my career. I have always believed that God won't let down anyone who works hard. Later, my work was selected as the promotional painting for that session of the Olympic Games. It quickly became a huge hit on the internet, and received a flood of positive comments. "Xiaoyu's skills are so amazing. I really envy her. She was the only one in the country admitted to Harvard University in the college entrance examination that year. After all these years, no one has been able to match her yet." Xiaoyu's grandfather is the famous painter Zhang Gongying. She has outshone her teacher. She's really great. Also because of this work, I became famous overnight. My parents were extremely proud of me, and insisted on holding a banquet to celebrate it properly. The banquet was bustling with activity and had a large number of guests, just like the celebration banquet my parents held for me when I was admitted to Harvard University. Those top-tier wealthy ladies praised me highly and even affectionately took my hand and asked me if I had a boyfriend. Just as I was about to reply that I didn't have a boyfriend yet, Xiaxing suddenly appeared, arm in arm with her newly-wed husband Zhang Tingfei. Zhang Tingfei was still the same as before, with an oily face and unfathomable eyes, exuding an uncomfortable aura all over. "Xiaoyu, congratulations," he said casually. Uttering this perfunctory remark, I responded with a forced smile. "Thank you." Zhang Tingfei turned to look at Xiaxing beside him and said, "Xiaxing, why don't you quickly bring up the congratulatory gift for your sister?" Xiaxing answered and then handed me a black box. I opened the lid, and a delicate pearl necklace came into view. Xiaxing said, "Tengfei went to Hong Kong last month and bid for 2 pieces of jewelry. I can't wear that many. One of them is for you. Sister, you've never worn such expensive jewelry before. Now you can really show it off." Pretending not to understand the disdain in her words, I said, "I'm an ordinary person. Wearing these expensive jewelry is of no use. You keep it for yourself." I returned the jewelry, then I turned to look at the wealthy lady beside me and answered her previous question. "Mrs. Hua, I don't have a boyfriend yet." Mrs. Hua's face immediately lit up with joy. She excitedly took my hand and said, "That's really great. Another day I'll introduce my son to you. 2 are of similar age, and both like art. You're sure to get along well." I replied with a beaming smile, "Okay." Then I silently looked at Xiaxing and saw that her eyes were filled with jealousy. The Hua family's family background is one of the wealthiest in Kyoto, far more powerful than Zhang Tingfei's family. Mrs. Hua's son, known as the Prince of the Beijing Circle, is Xiaxing's alumni in this life, and also her secret crush from her youth. Xiaxing had tried every means to seduce young Master Hua, but he simply looked down on her and never showed her any kindness. So our parents had to settle for the next best thing, and married Xiaxing to the old man Zhang Tingfei, who was X years older than her. After the Olympic Games, I seized the opportunity and held a personal art exhibition. This was my first art exhibition. My grandfather gave me great support. He was more eager than anyone else for the success of my first art exhibition. Mrs. Hua also made a high-profile appearance, arm in arm with her son, the Prince of the Beijing Circle. Mrs. Hua was very fond of my works and kept praising my outstanding talent. After that, she said to her son, "Hua Yanjing, Xiaoyu is really excellent. Son, you should learn from her more." Hua Yanjing looked at me with warm and gentle eyes. I slightly curved the corners of my mouth at him. Just then, a familiar voice interjected. "Look at how capable Xiaoyu is. She not only got into Harvard University, but also had her works selected for the Olympics. You 2 are sisters. How could there be such a big difference?" It turned out to be Xiaxing and her mother-in-law at this time. Xiaxing's belly was slightly swollen, but she still had to carry her mother-in-law's clothes, sun hat, and bag. She didn't look like a wealthy lady of a noble family at all. She clearly looked like a servant of the Zhang family. I couldn't help but curl the corners of my mouth. Zhang Tingfei's mother was an extremely mean-spirited old lady in my previous life. I suffered a lot of humiliation from her. She looked down on me, thinking that I was coveting the Zhang family's wealth and splendor, so she made things difficult for me everywhere. There were clearly more than enough servants at home, but the old lady insisted that I fetch water to wash her feet every night, and even asked me to wash her underwear by hand. I never revealed these past experiences to my family, so Xiaxing knew nothing about them. I'm afraid that in this life, her situation in the Zhang family won't be much better than mine in the past. "Xiaoyu." The old lady saw me and took the initiative to greet me. Replied indifferently, "Hello, madam." The old lady enthusiastically took my hand and said, "I've carefully looked at all your works. They are really wonderful. When do you have time to come to my house and teach me how to paint?" The old lady had no other hobbies. She was only obsessed with painting when she was young. She also had the dream of becoming a painter. Unfortunately, she didn't have much talent and failed to fulfill her wish. Later, she married Zhang Tingfei's father and became a full-time housewife. That dream was then forever buried. I showed a look of embarrassment. I didn't want to set foot in the Zhang family, even half a step. Xiaxing interjected from the side. "Sister, my mother-in-law is kindly inviting you. You won't be ungrateful, will you?" Her eyes were full of dissatisfaction with me, as if she was saying, "Don't be so unappreciative. Shut up. Do you have a say here?" The old lady glared at her unhappily. Xiaxing immediately looked extremely wrong. The looks from the people around her were a mixture of sympathy and ridicule. I smiled casually at the old lady and said, "Sure, when I'm free, we can exchange ideas." "That's just what I'm waiting to hear." A bright smile bloomed on the old lady's wrinkled face. My first art exhibition was quite successful. There were many people visiting, and almost all the comments were praise. This was a good start. Then I immediately plunged into the preparation for the second art exhibition. Just then, my parents called and told me that the fetus in Xiaxing's womb had stopped developing and died, and asked me to go to the hospital quickly. How could it suddenly die for no reason? I quickly put down my paintbrush and rushed to the hospital with my grandfather. Just as we arrived at the door of the ward, we heard the voices of my parents scolding Xiaxing inside. How could the child be gone just like that? Why can't you be more careful? We've put so much effort into cultivating you and getting you into a top-tier wealthy family. Why don't you know how to cherish it? Are you stupid? You can't even keep a child you far inferior to your sister. Xiaxing was crying softly. I didn't mean to either. I just had a prenatal check-up last month. And the doctor said the baby was healthy. Who knew that when I had the check-up this month, the doctor said the fetus had stopped developing. Hearing this, my grandfather shook his head and sighed. The wealthy family is as deep as the sea. She still thought it was easy to mix in the wealthy family? Needless to say, someone must have tampered with her child. I also sighed and said, Xiaxing is ignorant and shallow. She really isn't cut out for the wealthy family. My grandfather looked extremely disappointed and said, Let's go. I am too lazy to go in and see her. I nodded and replied, Okay. I also didn't want to face the 3 people in the ward. Old Mrs. Zhang had always looked down on Xiaxing when she was still pregnant. She could order her around now that the child was gone. Old Mrs. Zhang treated her even more harshly. On the day of Mrs. Hua's birthday, I went to the Hua family to offer my congratulations. Xiaxing, Zhang Tingfei, and old Mrs. Zhang were all there. Xiaxing was severely scolded because the coffee she poured for old Mrs. Zhang was too hot. Why is this coffee so hot? Do you want to scald me to death? Zhang Tingfei also joined in scolding Xiaxing. Why can't you be more careful? Xiaxing's face turned red with embarrassment. She was so embarrassed that she wanted to find a hole to crawl into. But she didn't dare to refute a word. As I was sitting by the swimming pool, sipping matcha, Hu Yanjing approached, carrying a plate of pastries. I haven't seen you eat anything all night. These pastries are sugar-free and low. Thought I specifically asked the kitchen to make them for you. How did he know I was on a diet? Meeting his warm and gentle gaze, as usual, my heart found a slight ripple. Thank you, the pastries are delicious. I could eat them forever without getting tired. He smiled faintly and said, There's more if you want. I quickly waved my hand. Are you trying to fatten me up? He grinned wider. Dare not. At that moment, I caught a glimpse of Xiaxing not far away, glaring at us with a sullen face. The next day, Xiaxing came to my grandfather's house and marched straight into my studio. Xiaoyu, what on earth did you do to seduce Hu Yanjing? Presumably, this was the question she had wanted to ask since last night. Her obsession indicated that she still couldn't get over Hu Yanjing. Looking at the jealousy churning in her eyes, I replied calmly, I've never seduced any man. With a slap, in a fit of anger, she kicked over the paint bucket beside her. The black paint splashed onto the white tiles, instantly staining the floor. We swapped our life scripts. Why are you still living a better life than me? Looking at her furious and resentful expression, I sighed softly. Xiaxing, people are naturally drawn to the strong. No one will respect someone who only wants to take and possess from others. Do you think others can't see through you just because you don't say it? Shut up. What right do you have to lecture me? She said, enraged. I pointed to the door. I don't care about you. Get out. Xiaxing gave me a fierce glare and said, I don't believe I can't beat you in this life. With that, she stormed out. My grandfather took me to an art circle dinner, saying he wanted to introduce me to some colleagues. During the dinner, I went out to use the restroom. As I passed a VIP room, I unexpectedly saw Xiaxing inside. She was being forced to drink by an oily old man who could be her grandfather. In an instant, I felt my blood rush to my head, while a chill ran through my body. I recognized this old Mani would know him, even if he turned to ashes. He was the very important person that Zhang Tingfei forced me to serve in my previous life. Zhang Tingfei, with his ambitious plans to expand his business empire, was willing to sacrifice his own wife by sending her to another man's bed. This old man was a pervert. He almost killed me with his torture. I will never forget those filthy and terrifying past experiences. My breathing grew rapid, and I was almost suffocating. I hurriedly ran away. The next time I saw Xiaxing was in the hospital. She was being helped by a servant of the Zhang family. Staggering out of the abortion room with her was Zhang Tingfei's secretary. The secretary said coldly, Madam, Mr. Zhang asked me to keep an eye on you now that the child is gone. My task is completed. There's work at the company. I'll leave first. Take care of yourself. Undoubtedly, the child Xiaxing had just aborted was not Zhang Tingfei's. As for whose it was hard to say. After the secretary left, I walked towards Xiaxing. My appearance made her both surprised and embarrassed. She asked, Are you here to laugh at me? I raised the medicine in my hand. Grandfather is ill. I'm here to pick up his medicine. Xiaxing still dared not look me in the eye. She said to the servant beside her, Let's go. I suddenly said, Xiaxing, those old men are disgusting, aren't they? Xiaxing's face immediately showed shock, as if she realized something. No wonder you followed grandfather without hesitation back then, Xiaoyu. Why did you hide this from me? As she spoke, her sad tears welled up and spilled over. Because this was what you wanted. She laughed almost maniacally, not knowing whether she was laughing at her own stupidity or foolishness. Xiaxing stabbed Zhang Tingfei. Zhang Tingfei was covered in wounds, with no part of his body intact, showing how much she hated him. Eventually, Xiaxing was sentenced to life imprisonment. When I visited her in prison, she had long lost her former glamour. At the age of X, she had no youthful vitality left. She looked like a middle-aged woman in her 40s, with despair in her eyes. Xiaoyu, I regret it. Her tone was sincere. I knew what she regretted, swapping our life scripts. I said to her calmly, Xiaxing, thank you for the fire you set. It set me free. Xiaxing choked and managed to squeeze out, Hui Yanjing must look down on me, right? I was surprised that she still cared about Hui Yanjing at this point. I replied, I don't know, but I don't think it matters anymore anyway. You and Hui Yanjing have no chance. Xiaxing put down the receiver and cried uncontrollably. I said, take care. Then I left. The prison was gloomy, while outside, the sky was clear and full of the breath of freedom. Xiaxing, I don't hate you. Not at all. Thank you for bearing the fate of my previous life for me. Because of this, I have the chance to be a decent person in this life. Soon after, news came from the prison that Xiaxing had committed suicide. After Xiaxing's suicide, my mother couldn't bear the blow, fell ill, and passed away not long after. My father also lost his mind due to successive blows. I didn't hesitate to send him to a mental hospital. This family, in their efforts to cross social classes, tried every means but ended up with nothing. It's both laughable and tragic. However, they don't deserve any sympathy. When Hui Yanjing proposed to me, I refused. Actually, I was once tempted, but I didn't want to step into the upper-class society, full of the pursuit of fame and fortune anymore. I yearned for a more free life. After rejecting him, I cut off contact with him and the Hui family and gradually faded out of the upper-class circle, focusing on my career ever since. In this life, I have achieved considerable success, enjoying both fame and fortune, and having freedom. I live a comfortable and chiyi life. If I had married into the Hui family, I wouldn't have achieved what I have now, and couldn't have enjoyed such a pleasant life. Life is always full of choices, but there's one thing I want to share with you all. Relying on others is unreliable. Oneself is one's own greatest support. May we all become the masters of our own lives. The end.